sit back, get comfortable, and let's go see what Marty has for us today.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another very, very exciting meeting this morning of the Peninsula Seniors Lecture Program. We're really delighted to be able to have our speaker this morning, who is a resident of Rancho Palos Verdes and a local author. She's written a book about her World War II experiences, which I've read, and you should as well, and they are very exciting, beginning as a nurse in occupied France, and then becoming a spy, keeping track and providing espionage on the Nazis. And so without any further ado, I want to introduce Madame Marthe Cohn of Rancho Palos Verdes.
Thank you very much for that very nice introduction, and I want to thank all the organizers. I would like to show you a 10-minute CD which was done by the Visital Center or Museum of Tolerance, however you want to call them. And it's an extremely good introduction to my talk.
How does a young girl from a devoutly Orthodox Jewish family end up becoming a spy whose efforts helped to bring an earlier end to the war in Europe in 1945? The answer to that question was one that Marthe Cohn, born Marthe Hoffnung, kept to herself for the better part of a half-century. Born in 1920 in the French town of Metz in the Alsace region of France near the German border, Marthe was one of 7 children. The family was quite religious, but at the same time mixed easily with their non-Jewish neighbors. But with war clouds on the horizon in September of 1939, the Hoffnungs and many of their Jewish neighbors decided to move to a safer part of France, away from the German border, to the town of Poitiers, southwest of Paris. However, they were not safe for long. The Nazis invaded France, and with little resistance, the French government capitulated. Immediately, life began to change.
We didn't know how bad it would be. We could not understand that, because even if we knew about Kristallnacht, that was in Germany, they did that to the Germans. They couldn't do that to the French people.
For a while, in spite of the various restrictions placed on the Jews, the Hoffnungs were able to go about their daily business. Marthe started nursing school and became engaged to a young medical student. As the war progressed and resistance to the Nazis and their Vichy French collaborators became more widespread, the family began to take more chances. Marthe and her sisters hid Jews who did not have the proper papers, and her fiancé became actively involved in resistance activities. One day, French police arrested her sister Stephanie and then her father. When her father was released shortly thereafter, the family managed to escape using false papers that did not identify them as Jews. There was a plan to help Stephanie escape from the French jail she was being held at, but sadly, it failed.
She was caught in the camp, and then later she was transferred to Drancy near Paris, and then to Pithiviers. And she wrote that they were going to be deported that afternoon of Yom Kippur 42.
Most of the Hoffnung family went to the mountains to join an older brother who was head of the resistance there. Marthe finished her nursing studies in Marseille, occasionally getting the chance to rendezvous with her fiancé Jacques. Then, in the summer of 1943, she went to Paris to work for a month in a hospital, traveling again under her false papers. She met briefly with Jacques. He was on the run for a resistance act that led to the murder of a Nazi collaborator. She begged him to stay in hiding with her.
And I told him, you cannot go back to Poitiers. You have immediately to escape and go south and go to Spain, and I will join you. But he said he has to go back. His family is in Poitiers. His brother is there. He will tell them goodbye and live with his brother and his friends as soon as they can. And he left after his examination. He left, and he promised me to write me every day. And 3 letters arrived. And the 4th one never came.
She soon learned that Jacques had been arrested along with his brother and several friends. He was tried and then executed for his resistance activities. Broken-hearted, Marthe returned to Marseille, graduated from her nursing studies, and then moved back to Paris to work for a registry. She remained there until the Allies liberated France.
When we heard on the radio that the troops were entering Paris, all the church bells started ringing, and we opened our windows and we all sang the Marseillaise. The whole city was singing the Marseillaise.
Almost immediately after the liberation, Marthe enlisted in the French army, where initially she worked as a social worker in the Alsace region of the country, close to her hometown of Metz. When her commanding officer learned that Marthe spoke fluent German, he recruited her to join Army intelligence.
I was introduced to Colonel Bouvet. He told me he needs me to interrogate people, to know what's going on, to know how the strategy of the German, if they are retreating or not retreating, and how many people are there, all this military information.
After procuring information from Nazi POWs, Marthe was ready for her spy mission. It involved crossing the border from Switzerland into Germany to see how entrenched the Nazis still were. She would then have to pass that intelligence on to the Allies. It took more than 13 tries, but Marthe made it over the border into Germany. Her cover was that she was a German nurse trying to find out what happened to her Nazi fiancé. One day, she came upon a group of German soldiers who had retreated from the Allies.
And we were walking, and among us was a non-commissioned officer who was an SS, and he was raving about the Jews, how much he had killed Poles and Jews and all that. And he loved, and he smelled Jews a mile away. That's always what they say. He was going back to the Siegfried line. He had been wounded, and he came back from the hospital. And as we walked, he fainted. So I was a good German nurse. I took care of him.
From this SS soldier, Marthe was able to obtain important information about exactly what was going on at the Nazi front lines. Making her way back to the Swiss border, she was able to transmit her report with the help of a Swiss farming family. Marthe then crossed the border again and made her way back into Germany to see if there was anything else she could uncover.
I walked to the Siegfried line to see what's going on. And when I arrived at the Siegfried line, they were all gone. The last stragglers were leaving. And they told me that the Siegfried line is empty. Do you realize what an important information that was?
The information Marthe uncovered helped to shorten the Allied effort to defeat the Nazis and saved untold numbers of lives. For the better part of a half-century, Marthe did not talk of her experiences, even with her family. But in the mid-1990s, while visiting in France, she made a request for her French Army records. When officials at the French archives saw her file of commendations and achievements, the wheels were put into motion for her to be awarded the Médaille Militaire, one of France's highest military honors, and the same medal awarded to Sir Winston Churchill by the French government. Why was she so quiet about her exploits over the years?
It was not modesty, but I thought that nobody would believe me. Usually a spy is a very tall, good-looking woman, and I didn't feel I was that type of person at all. I was a very unlikely spy. Like usually when the media interviews you, they never give back what you told them. They always change things. And in that video, there are several things which are wrong. But the most important of all is that my sister was never arrested by the French police. My sister was arrested by the Gestapo, who came to the house at dinner time and arrested her at a time when, and I am emphasizing that, when in Poitiers, because things occur differently in different cities or different regions, but in Poitiers, the Germans had not yet started arresting French Jews. They had only arrested the foreigners, the foreign Jews and other foreigners. You know that when things bad occur, then the foreigners get always the first try, okay? That's classical. But there too, but my sister was arrested because for resistance acts, and she was kept because she refused to talk to the Germans and give them the information they wanted. They wanted her to denounce a farmer. I have no time to go into details. A farmer who had helped us people to have people cross from unoccupied to occupied, from occupied France to non-occupied France. So that farmer was questioned, and they had suspicion, and my sister refused to give them, to confirm that that farmer was helping people cross between, like I told you, occupied France to non-occupied France, or Vichy, the Vichy government. Now, she was kept, she was first 1 month in prison, then she was transferred to a camp in Poitiers, and she refused to escape. She had the occasion to escape. She refused to escape because she was helping the children in the camp, the Jewish foreign children in the camp. And later, when she accepted to escape, it was too late and it didn't work out, and she was deported to Auschwitz, and she never came back. She was 21 years old and a medical student. So I wanted to make to tell you the right thing and not what you saw, that she was arrested by the French police, which was absolutely not true. Now, another thing which is important is that in 1939, before the war started, in August 39, the French government asked that all the people from Metz, we were only about 35 miles from the border, the German border, so that all the people who could go to another city would be assigned to Poitiers. All the people from Metz were assigned to Poitiers. And they asked that all the people who could afford it to go on their own leave. And that's when we left. It was not only the Jewish population which left, it was everybody. Okay, that was another mistake in that video. Okay, the other ones, I am not going to go into details, are less important. I don't know, you all must know about what happened during the occupation. Things in the beginning were very mild, because the Germans wanted the French population to like them, and they had orders to behave in France. So we never had that barbarism that you all heard of in Eastern Europe and in other countries. In France, they were very different. And that worked in their favor in the beginning, because French people said they are very decent. They are not going to do anything wrong. But slowly, the thing changed. And they changed mostly, I won't go into more detail than that, but they changed mostly after Germany started the war with Russia. At that time, things became more and more difficult for the whole population, but much worse for the Jews, as you can understand. That was normal for the Germans, not for us, but for the Germans. But anyway, in the beginning, like I told you, they were very mild, but then first in the end of 1940, after they had invaded France in June 40, and towards the end of 1940, they ordered all the Jewish fathers to come and sign up their whole family members. Okay, so, and everything which was ordered was always punishable by death or by deportation. There was never a warning. It was always all the orders were always followed by the warning that if you didn't do it, you're going to be deported or killed. So my father, as a good Jewish father, went and gave all our names and his own name, and that's how the German had the list of all the Jews in France, in occupied France. Okay, and that was the first thing. But we never expected that things would get as bad as they were going to be. You know, even when they became very bad, we still couldn't understand, and we never knew that what happened in the concentration camps. We knew it was not good to be deported. Nobody wanted to be deported, but we thought that everybody was sent to work in the camp, to work for the Germans, and we were sure that they would not, have a marvelous life, but we never expected what really occurred. And we knew only after the war, after when I met the first survivors of camps in Germany, and I stopped and talked to them. And when they told me what happened in the camps, I didn't believe them. I thought they were psychiatric patients who had, escaped from a hospital. But when I heard so many tell me the same story, I started to understand that it was inconceivable that a country who was so civilized could do such things. Okay? I just want to give you some idea of what was occurring. Now, in 1942, really things started to get very bad. And at that time, the resistance against the Germans started too. Until then, there was a very, very little resistance because people believed that things would be okay, and they believed in our Maréchal Pétain, who was the chief of Vichy, was governing in Vichy. And he was a collaborator and worked with the Germans. But he was a hero of World War I, and then everybody believed that what he was doing was the right thing. You never know what the government is going to do, even if you... And you always think in the beginning that the government knows better than the population. And if they do something like that, that means it's okay. But in reality, they don't know better than we do. And they do the wrong things too, very often. Okay, now I want to go. I told you a little bit about what happened during the occupation. Now I want to talk to you about how I joined the army. It was extremely difficult to join the army at that time because the French were very wary of people who had collaborated with the Germans and wanted to join the army to wash white their past. So you had to prove that you hadn't collaborated. It's a very difficult thing to prove. And on top of it, my papers were not the right papers. My papers were in my real name, but I had not the stamp Jew. So I could not tell the authorities, but I was Jewish. And anyway, that wouldn't have helped because they were, like in every element, there were people who had collaborated, even Jews who had collaborated with the Germans. So there was no way that I could prove that I was a good person. But the mother of my fiancé, who had lost her 2 boys, so her only children, who were both shot like you saw in the video, and her husband was in Buchenwald. He was arrested too and sent to Buchenwald. So she vouched for me. And being the mother of 2 heroes and her husband in Buchenwald, they believed her and they accepted me finally in the army. So I was told, tomorrow or the day after you go to a certain place, you go on a bus. And the bus is taking you to the front in Alsace. So I went to the designated place, got on the bus, and we left. It was an old rickety bus. You have to understand that in 1944, we had very little left in France. The Germans had emptied France completely. They had stolen whatever they could from France, and we had almost nothing. So we had only that old rickety bus on which I went, and we left for Alsace, and that old rickety bus had engine trouble every few miles. We had to stop and fix it. So it took us forever to arrive at the front. And on top of it, we lacked gasoline. And the French government didn't have any gasoline. The French army had no gasoline. The only people who had gasoline were the Americans. So we went to the American army. We were part of it. We were part of Patton's army. And we asked for gasoline, and they said, no way. They didn't trust us. We were only French. So they didn't give us any gasoline. So what do you do? So we stole gasoline from unattended jeeps. That was the only way we could reach the front. And I was the only girl on the bus. At the time, I was just a girl on the bus. So I was a lookout. I was an accomplice because I helped them steal the gasoline. And that's how we reached the front. And when we arrived at the front, I was very badly welcomed by a captain of the unit I was assigned to, because he felt that I hadn't done enough during the resistance. He asked me what I had done, and I told him what I had done, helping people a lot, helping them cross the border between occupied and non-occupied France, and I saved many people that way. And I told them that my fiancé was shot, my sister was deported, and he said, more reason for you to have been more active in the resistance. You are a coward, and I don't want you in the army. Go back to your mother. And I told him, oh no, I had enough trouble coming here. And the headquarters, the French headquarters sent me, I'm going to stay. So he said, okay, if you stay as a nurse, I was already a registered nurse by then. As a registered nurse, you should be an officer. But because you were such a coward, that you are going to be a sergeant. And I just shrugged my shoulders. I couldn't care less what I was. So he got mad, even madder, because I shrugged my shoulder. And he said, and I don't need a nurse. I have enough nursing staff. You are going to be a social worker. I never had been a social worker. I never had been taught to be a social worker. I didn't know the first thing what a social worker is supposed to do. And he didn't give me any directives. So, but one thing he told me is that I have to repeat here. He said to me, you should have gone out and killed a German. And I looked at him and said, as much I hated the Germans, I don't think I could have done that. And I still know that I couldn't have done that. I don't know how many of you can go out cold-blooded in the street and just kill a German. As much you hate them, it's a very difficult thing to do. So after that, I was given a room in a home with a family in that village where we were headquartered. And the next morning I got up. What do I do as a social worker? I didn't know. So I got up and I walked to the front. I asked people where the front was. I had to cross a little forest, and then I reached the front near a canal. It was a very narrow canal, and the Germans had just retreated 2 days earlier on the eastern side of the canal, and our front was on the western side of the canal. So I went to the front, and I went into the foxholes and asked the kids what they needed. Now, I have to explain to you that the army gave me a uniform which was much, much too big for me. So I looked like a clown in that huge uniform, and the boys mostly of them were very young kids. They were very surprised to see that little blonde woman in that huge uniform come into foxholes and ask them what they needed. They never had a social worker worry about their well-being. So here I did that for 3 weeks. And I brought them whatever they asked me to do, and I helped them write letters. Many of them were illiterate and didn't know how to write, so I helped them write letters to their families, and I did this type of things. Then one day at lunchtime, I crossed the little square of the village, and I met the colonel of the regiment. And he was an extremely well-known resistant. And he was a communist, which I didn't even know at the time, because when you were in the resistance, you never knew what the other people were doing. You know, everything was absolutely secret. And I never had heard of him until I joined this unit. But once I joined this unit, I heard what a terrific guy he was. And then I understood why the captain told me I should have killed a German, because that colonel killed the first German in France in the metro in Paris, and he was able to escape. And then later he formed a whole regiment, and the army felt that he had done so much for the country that they integrated his unit of resistance into the mainstream army. And that's why I was sent to that group, and I didn't even know about them. But I learned very fast who they were. So that colonel stopped me, his name was Colonel Fabien, and asked me if I would man his telephone during lunchtime. So I went with him to his office, he showed me around, and leaving he said to me, I am sorry, I have nothing for you to read here. There are only German books. And I told him that's quite all right. I read German fluently. And very, very interested, he walked back to me and said, do you speak German? I said, yes, fluently. I am from Lorraine, and in my family we spoke both languages. Since I'm born, I speak both languages. So he told me, we desperately need women to enter the intelligence service, to go into mission, to learn what the strategy of the army is. Would you be willing to do that? And without a second thought, I accepted. Then he left. And I sat down and I wondered, what did I get into? But it was too late. I had committed myself. That was it. 2 days later, I was picked up, taken to headquarters of the intelligence army service in Mühlhausen, or Mulhouse in French, and there I was trained for several weeks. For about 3 weeks, I was under intensive training, and I was trained to read maps, which is still useful now to guide my husband when we travel, and to read code, to write in code, to recognize every uniform, every insignia, every grade of the German army, and every equipment of the German army. So I had to memorize all that. Luckily, I have a good memory. And then I passed a test where 2 officers interrogated me like I was going to be interrogated by the Germans if I was caught. And after the test, I was told I was okay, and I was assigned to the Commandos of Africa, who was a regiment who came from North Africa. And here in the United States, you all know that the Allies landed in Normandy in June of 1944. But what is not very much known is that another army of Allied as large an army as the one in Normandy landed on the Mediterranean coast east of Toulon in August of 44. And these people found their way up from the beach to Alsace by the Rhone Valley. Okay? And this is the army that I met, because the French army or the French division who was with the Allies in Normandy was the division of General Leclerc, the second armored division. Sometimes I forget the word. Armored division. So I met the commandos of Africa who had already fought in Tunisia, in Eritrea, in Sicilia, in Italy, in Corsica, and they were the first one to land in the Mediterranean, on the Mediterranean beach. And it was a very, very great unit, and I was very proud to be assigned to them. So I was assigned to that unit, and I was driven one night very late. I was always driven late at night. Don't ask me why, but it never happened in daytime. So very late at night, in wintertime, in the Vosges Mountains, and it was horribly cold. That was in January 1945. So I was driven to the place where I was going to meet the commandos of Africa. And we couldn't have lights on because we were near the front, so the windshield was down. So, and I was in civilian clothes. You understand that when I go into mission, I cannot be in uniform. So I was in civilian clothes, and they were not as warm as the military clothes. So I had not expected to need my civilian clothes in wintertime. So I was freezing in that ship, absolutely frozen. And we arrived at a psychiatric hospital in Cernay. And we went down to the basement, and we met the commandos of Africa. They were all, it was a very dark and very cold basement. The floor was in cement. You know how a basement in a hospital is. And it was pitch dark, and they were all sleeping because they had fought that day, and they had a horrible day. They lost 182 people that day, soldiers and officers, and many wounded. So they had a horrible day, and they were all fast asleep. And the officer who drove me didn't even bring a flashlight, so he had only matches, and he switched on matches to find who was in charge. We finally, by shaking several people, we finally found the commandant who was in charge. So he had to shake him to awake him. The commandant sat up, and he said, "I am bringing you Mademoiselle Le Nôtre," because in the army, when you are in intelligence, you get another name. You don't carry your own name. So Mademoiselle Le Nôtre, and he looked at me, half asleep, and said, "Fine, just find some chairs and sit down." And he fell asleep again. So in the dark, the lieutenant found 2 chairs, and they were metal chairs, cold like everything else, and I was already freezing. So we sat down on these chairs, and I didn't know what to do with myself because I was extremely tired, cold, unhappy, and I didn't know what I should do. But with my foot, I felt the mattress a few inches away. So I put one foot on the mattress, then I put the second foot on the mattress, and finally I found myself lying down on the mattress when I knew that somebody was sleeping there. But I put my head where his feet were. Then I felt he had a blanket, and I was so cold, so I pulled the blanket inch by inch, not to awake him. And I finally had the blankets over me, but I was still freezing. I didn't sleep at all. It was an atrocious night. And at daybreak, that person who was sleeping on the mattress awoke, and he felt my legs, and he screamed, "God damn it, a woman." So I sat up too, and we barely saw each other. It was so grayish in that basement. And I told him that I was here and I was cold, that's why I lay down. And we became the best of friends. And years later, I introduced my husband to that. I called him my mattress mate. But anyway, that's how I was introduced to the Commandos of Africa. So after that, I was introduced to the colonel, who you saw in the video, asked me to interrogate soldiers and officers, prisoners of war, and I was able to get quite a bit of information because I was not shy to threaten these Germans, not shy at all. And I reminded them always how barbaric they had been, and told them, you are losing the war anyway. So if you give us some information, we will make sure that your families will be protected if they are still alive, because so many people had been killed in Germany by bombardments, by the Allied bombardments. So many of them, I don't say all of them, but many of them gave me very valuable information. And that was an extremely important point for my service and for the Commandos of Africa. Then I was sent into mission, and as you heard, 13 times it didn't work out. Twice I was taken prisoners by Arab soldiers of our army, because we had Arabs and black soldiers from our former, at the time they were still our colonies in North Africa and in Africa. So we had these Moroccan and Tunisian and Algerian soldiers, and twice they made me prisoner because they thought that I was a German spy. And they want to shoot me, they want to beat me up, they want to do everything. But I had been taught how to get out of such predicament. If not, I wouldn't be here now. But anyway, after that, my captain, who was tired of my failures to cross, decided that he would have me cross from Switzerland into Germany. So that was one way of doing it. I was taken, now I have to tell you that the Swiss were supposedly neutral, but in reality they had worked for the Germans. Now that we were getting successful, they were working for us. So they accept the intelligence unit of Basel in Switzerland accepted to help me cross from Switzerland into Germany. So I was taken to Basel, and by one of our officers, and an agent of the Basel unit took me to the border with Germany, and by car. It was near Schaffhausen. And when we drove there, we stopped the car near a little forest. By foot, we crossed the forest. At the end of the forest was a large field. To the right of the forest was a large field. The forest and the field were Switzerland. But at the northern edge of the field was a small road, and that road was Germany. And there were no fences, nothing. But the road was not at all like the video showed. But the road was watched by two sentinels. One came from the east going west and stopped at the middle. The other one came from the west to the east, stopped in the middle. They talked a second, turned their back, and walked back to the edge of that field, to the end of the field on both sides. And I have to tell you that last year we were in Switzerland, and my husband decided we should look for that area to see if we can find it. I saw it on a map. I recognized it right away on a map because Switzerland has several enclaves. That means the country juts into Germany. And that was the enclave I knew, which was the closest to Singer, which is the city where I walked to. So I knew that was the closest one. So on the map, I recognized it. But we had a terrible time finding it. And finally, towards dusk, I stopped a young man who was running with his dog. And I showed him the map, and I asked him if he could tell me how to get there. Because people had all day long sent us to places where it was never the right place. So he said, oh yes, I know it. But he tried to explain to me, and since I'm in the United States, I never speak German. I forgot most of my German. I had terrible trouble remembering and understanding what he was saying. So he said to me, wait 2 minutes. That I understood. And he went home, got his car, and then we followed him with our car, and he took us to the exact spot. And my husband took pictures, and it's exactly where I crossed. It has changed somewhat, but not very much. But anyway, I go back to my story. So we stopped. He showed me the road, and he said, towards the evening, when it becomes a little darkish, you are going to crawl through that field behind the bushes near the road. And when the two soldiers turn their back both to you and walk to the edge of the field, you get up on the road and you walk towards the east. Very nice. So, yeah. But at the moment I wasn't even frightened. So we spent the whole afternoon in that forest. That was in April 1945. And that was the 9th of April 45. No, the 11th, I'm sorry. The 11th, because 2 days later was my 25th birthday. So we were in that forest, and we talked all afternoon. He talked to me about his family, his wife and children. He was a middle-aged man. I was 24 years old for 2 more days. And for me, he was an old man. You know that. So at one point, he said to me, you probably will die tonight. Why don't we have a good time now? And that was absolutely not in my thoughts. So that was over. We never talked about that again. But towards evening, he said, now it's the time. So I took my little suitcase and I crawled behind the bushes. But once I was behind these bushes, I could not find the strength to get up and walk on the road. I just couldn't. I was really paralyzed with fear. And it was so horrible that, I just couldn't understand how people could expect me to do that. And I felt I had nobody had the right to ask me to do it. But I had been volunteer. I had volunteered to do it. But anyway, I couldn't find the courage to get up and do it. And it took me a very, very long time, several hours, perhaps 2 hours, I don't know exactly. I never looked at my watch. But it took me a very long time to overcome my fear. And what helped me is because I remembered that the first time I missed, I failed to cross the front into German territory. The captain, that's another captain. I have a lot of captains who did bad things. But that captain who had organized that mission was a perfectionist, and he could not accept that a mission fails. And he said that I was taken prisoners by the Arabs because I did it willfully, because I was afraid I had gotten cold feet and I was afraid to go to the German post where I was supposed to go. Or I didn't know that these French people were there. I had no idea. And it turned out later that the guide had given me the wrong trail, that I was supposed to be on the third trail, then they wouldn't have stopped me. But I was on the second trail where I was not supposed to be, so they stopped me. But that captain couldn't accept that his mission failed. So he said that it was all due to me, that I had cold feet. And when I laid there, so terrified, I remembered that, and I said, oh my God, if this time I don't do it, he's going to say, look, I always told you she wouldn't do it, that she has cold feet. She never was able to do it. That determined me. So I took my little suitcase, got up when the German soldiers separated, turned their back, walked towards the German soldier, towards the east to go singen, raised my right arm, Heil Hitler, showed him my papers, he accepted it, I was in Germany. So I want to tell you that besides the information that the Siegfried line was emptied, which was a very important information, I found another information. That's why I got all these decorations, because of these two informations. The second was where the remnant of the German army was hidden in ambush waiting for the Allies' troops. Thank you very much.
I'd like to then take just one more moment to introduce Dr. Major Cohen, who's Madame Cohen's husband, who she met in Geneva in 1953, was it?
We're here in the home of Marthe Cohen, and she's going to show us some of her medals and other memorabilia. Can you tell us about the picture on the wall?
Yes. This is a picture of my sister Stephanie, who was 16 months younger than I was. She was a medical student in Poitiers, where we were refugees from 1939 to 1942. In June 1942, she was arrested for resistance acts, and she was arrested by the Gestapo at home at dinner time and taken to the Gestapo. A few hours later, the Gestapo came back and arrested my father, telling him that my sister was fresh toward them. So they arrested him because she still was a minor. That occurred before the Gestapo in Poitiers, and I emphasize in Poitiers because things happen differently in different cities. But in Poitiers, they had not yet started to arrest French Jews, only the foreigners. And Stephanie was arrested because she had written a letter to a farmer who helped us with people who wanted to escape from the occupied part of France to the non-occupied part of France, to the Vichy government, and that farmer had land on between the occupied and non-occupied France, and he was helping people escape to non-occupied France. And my sister had written a letter to that farmer, and we have never understood why she had signed her real name to that letter, which was an absolute thing that we never did. And the Gestapo came to the house and arrested her, but because she refused to tell them that the farmer was helping people escape through his property, then they kept her, and they let my father come home the same night. But they kept my sister, and she was in prison for 1 month, and then she was in a camp in Poitiers, and later she was transferred to Drancy, near Paris, then to Pithiviers, and she was deported on September 21st, the day of Yom Kippur, 1942, to an unknown site. But later we found out that she had been deported to Auschwitz and she never came back. And above her picture is a prayer, the Hebrew prayer, the Kaddish for the dead. And the artist who painted that, his concept was to start with a prayer and then only symbols follow. The symbols are there because the people who are being gassed are dying and they cannot recite the whole entire prayer anymore. This is a certificate which was awarded me by the President of the French Republic in 2004. It was awarded to me by Mr. André Borde, a former minister of the French veterans under the governments of President Pompidou and Giscard d'Estaing. This is a medal of the Légion d'honneur I was referring to with the certificate. This picture was taken by a reporter of the magazine which is called the Point de Vue. And that's a magazine which reports mostly about royalty in Europe. I was very surprised and I asked the reporter, what do I have to do with this royalty? She started laughing and she said, you deserve it. This medal, that's a Légion d'honneur again, and which was given by Mr. André Borde that you see in that picture. The ceremony took place in Paris on January 13, 2005. These photographs were taken from my book titled Behind Enemy Lines, the true story of a French Jewish spy in Nazi Germany. My book was published in 2002 by Harmony Books, a subdivision of Random House in New York. This certificate is for the Médaille Militaire, which is only given by the French government to soldiers, non-commissioned officers, or generals who command the troops on the field. And that's why Churchill got it, because he was the commander of the British soldiers. That medal was the first medal I got from the French government about 60 years after the war. And in France, you have to request these medals. They are not given to you automatically. And I waited 60 years to request it. The medal we are looking at now is a Médaille Militaire, which was awarded to me in 1999 by a decree of the French president. The medal we are looking at now is a medal of the recognition of the French nation, which was awarded to me without requesting it. It was awarded at the time when I requested the proof that I was a veteran of the French army, because I was in the intelligence service. I was never given any military documents, so I had to go to the archives of Pau in 1996, where I finally received my first documents that I had been in the army. This Croix de Guerre has 2 stars. I was given 2 citations. The first one was by Colonel Bouvet, who was the chief of the Commandos of Africa. My intelligence service had assigned me to the Commandos of Africa. And with their help, I tried unsuccessfully to cross the front 14 times. But I was able to get very important information that I gave to Colonel Bouvet, and which helped the tactics of the army during the retreat of the German from Alsace. And the second citation was given to me by my agency, the Secret Service agency, after my return from mission in Germany, where I was for 3 weeks, and from where I sent information which, according to the citation, help terminate the war faster with less casualties. This medal is for my service in Indochina or Vietnam, like it's called in the United States. In January 1946, I joined as a volunteer the health service in Vietnam, and where I stayed 3 years less 2 months as a nurse. My intelligence service was all finished. Now I became again a normal person with a normal life as a nurse. This medal was given to me by the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles at a big ceremony in a hotel in Beverly Hills. This medal was awarded to me by the French veterans of Poitiers. And Poitiers was a city where we had lived as refugees from 1939 to 1942, when we had to escape because my sister had been arrested, and we had to escape to prevent the arrestation of the whole entire family. Veterans gave me that award in 2002. After my book was published, I went back to Poitiers and gave a talk where I had an audience of over 600 people. Unbeknownst to me, my friend Michael Potter sent my book to a secretary of Congressman Tom Lantos. And one day, when I went to get my mail across the street, I saw a brown package lying in the street. I picked it up, turned it over, and saw it was addressed to me. I came home, opened it, and couldn't believe to find that my story was in the congressional report.
Thank you, Marthe, for having us in your home and showing us your special medals as well as telling us about the history.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching the Peninsula Senior Lecture Series. I'm Betty Wheaton. We'll see you next time.